I wasn't trying to overhear anything. I was just sitting in the sunroom with my needlepoint and a cup of chamomile, the way I do most Tuesday evenings, after the dinner dishes are cleared. The window behind the love seat was cracked open, 2 inches. I always keep it cracked because the room holds heat and their voices carried through the screen without any help from me. My son was at the kitchen table. I could tell by the sound of his chair. The way it scrapes slightly on the left side, where the leg is uneven. My daughter-in-law was near the sink. I recognized the rhythm of her movements, water on, water off. The hollow tap of her rings against the faucet handle. She's been here 2.5 years, she said. Not angry. Not even frustrated. Really. Just factual. The way you'd say the milk has been open since Thursday. I know, my son said. She doesn't do anything. Daniel, she sits in that room and does her little projects and expects to be included in everything. But she doesn't actually contribute. You know that. There was a pause. I set my needlepoint in my lap. She's my mother, he said. I know she's your mother. I'm not saying she's a bad person. I'm saying she doesn't contribute. She's comfortable. She's settled in. And we're not a retirement home. The water came on again. I heard her rinse something and set it in the rack. I don't want to have this conversation again. My son said, we have to. At some point, we have to. I sat very still. The needle in my hand was threaded with pale green. I'd been working on a hummingbird. The wings half done. I set it on the side table, gently, and looked out through the cracked window at the dark yard. The hydrangeas I'd planted along the back fence were barely visible in the porch light, white and round as paper lanterns. I didn't go in. I didn't knock on the door frame and ask if anyone wanted more tea. I just sat in my chair in the sunroom until I heard them move down the hall. And then I folded my needlepoint into the basket, turned off the lamp, and went upstairs to my room. My room. That's what we called it. The guest room at the top of the stairs, with the yellow curtains that came with the house, and the narrow closet that still smelled faintly of cedar from the previous owners. I'd brought a few things from my old house to make it feel less temporary. A photograph of my late husband Raymond on his fishing boat, the summer before he got sick. A small watercolor of the Carolina coast that a friend had painted and given me years ago, my grandmother's quilt. The one with the double wedding ring pattern, in blue and cream. I'd moved in when Raymond died. My son had insisted. He said the house was too big for one person. That grief was harder alone. That he wanted me close. I'd believed him. I'd sold the house Raymond and I had lived in for 31 years, the one with the wraparound porch. The one where we raised him. The one where I'd planted every rose bush myself, and I moved into the yellow guest room with 6 boxes and a suitcase, and the belief that family meant something solid. That was 2.5 years ago. The money from the house, a considerable amount. Because Raymond had been careful, and the market had been kind, I kept in an account in my name alone. I hadn't touched the principal. I thought perhaps someday we'd use it for something together. A trip. A grandchild's education. Something shared. I lay in bed that night and looked at the ceiling and thought about the word my daughter-in-law had used. Contribute. I thought about the 17 loads of laundry I'd done since moving in. The school pickups when her car was in the shop for a week. The time their younger one, Nora, had a fever of 103, and they were both stuck at a work conference in Atlanta. And I sat up through the night with a wet cloth and a children's book about a rabbit who couldn't sleep, reading it over and over until her breathing eased. I thought about the casseroles, the grocery runs. The afternoon I spent on my hands and knees, recaulking the guest bathroom because the grout was crumbling and no one else had noticed. I didn't feel angry. I felt something quieter than anger. Something that had been building without my realizing it. The way water rises in a basement slow. Invisible. Until suddenly you're standing in it. The next morning I came down early. While the house was still dark, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen. I wrote down a number. Then I wrote down another number beside it. Then I sat and looked at those two numbers for a long time. I was not, as my daughter-in-law had said, a woman without assets. The house my son and his wife lived in, the one with the 4 bedrooms, and the 2-car garage and the yard where my grandchildren had a trampoline, I had bought it. Not helped with it. Not contributed to a down payment. I had bought it. In full. 7 years ago. As a gift to my son, when he and my daughter-in-law were struggling after his company downsized. The deed was in his name. I had never mentioned it again, because that wasn't why I'd done it. But I knew what I'd done. I closed the legal pad and went upstairs before anyone woke up. The conversation I overheard was a Tuesday. By Saturday, I'd already called my attorney. Her name was Patricia, and I'd used her for 30 years, since Raymond and I first bought property together. She answered on the second ring, even though I called on a weekend morning, which told me what I already suspected, that she had been half expecting to hear from me. "Helen," she said. "How are you?" "I'm fine." I said, "I need to understand something. The house, Daniel's house, the deed. Where does that stand legally? And what are my options?" There was a brief pause. "You gifted it to him outright. That's a completed gift. Legally. The property is his." "I know," I said. "I'm not trying to take it back. I want to understand what I can and can't do with my own estate going forward." "That," she said, "is a different question entirely. And the answer is quite a lot." I drove to her office Monday morning and sat across the wide oak desk I'd sat across many times before. And we talked for 2 hours. I asked about my accounts, my investments, a small piece of land Raymond and I had held in Tennessee for years without doing anything with it. I asked about a trust. I asked about what it meant to restructure beneficiaries. Patricia took notes. At one point, she looked up at me and said, quietly, "Are you all right?" "Helen, I am," I said. "I'm trying to make sure I stay that way." On the way home, I stopped at a florist and bought myself a bunch of dahlias. Orange and dark red. The colors of something that hadn't given up yet. I put them in a glass on my windowsill and looked at them while I thought about what came next. I had not gone looking for the folder. That needs to be understood. I was searching for a pair of scissors, the good fabric scissors I use for needlepoint, which Nora had borrowed and not returned. I checked the craft supply drawer in the mudroom, the junk drawer by the phone. And then I remembered that the week before I'd seen my daughter-in-law at the desk in the study, and I thought perhaps Nora had left them there. The study was empty. I opened the side drawer, where small things accumulated: stamps, rubber bands, loose batteries. The scissors weren't there. But the folder was. It was a plain manila folder, labeled in my daughter-in-law's handwriting, "Mom Estate, Future Planning." I stood in the quiet study for a moment. Then I picked it up. The first page was a printout from a website, a senior living community 40 minutes away. The kind that calls itself a continuum of care community, which is a gracious way of saying that you move in independently, and then, as things decline, you move to assisted living and then memory care without having to change addresses. Someone had highlighted a line about pricing and written in the margin, "Ask about sliding scale. What triggers the transition?" The second page was a printout of my financial accounts. I didn't know how she'd gotten access to those figures, but the numbers were close enough to accurate to make my mouth go dry. At the bottom, in pencil, liquid assets sufficient. No financial obstacle to transition. The third page was a note in my son's handwriting. I recognized it immediately, the way he made his capital M's. The slight leftward lean. It said, "Talk to Dr. Weston." He said cognitively, "She's fine." But physically, the progression over the next 5 years could change things significantly. Better to plan now than scramble later. Agree. I put the folder back exactly as I'd found it. I went upstairs to my room and sat in the chair by the window for a very long time. I wasn't surprised. Exactly. What I felt was more like a slow recognition, the feeling of finally seeing clearly something that had been blurry for too long. They had not been careless with me. They had been careful, organized, methodical. They had looked at me and seen a situation to be managed, a variable to be planned around, a cost to be eventually redirected elsewhere. I picked up the phone and called Patricia again. "I want to move forward," I said, "on everything we discussed Monday." "How soon?" she asked. "Within the month," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "I can make that work." What my son and daughter-in-law did not know was that the Tennessee land 12 acres of forested hillside outside of Gatlinburg that Raymond had bought in 1989 for reasons he never fully explained. Just saying he liked the idea of it had, over the years, become rather valuable. A resort developer had been making quiet inquiries for 3 years. Raymond's instinct had been right. As it often was, I also had not mentioned to anyone that my own mother, who had died the previous spring, had left her estate divided between me and my brother. My brother had already received his half. Mine was in trust, pending a paperwork issue that Patricia had been working through. It was not a small sum. None of this was anyone's business but mine. But I thought about it now, carefully. The way you think about cards you've been holding close to your chest for so long, you forgot you were holding them. I thought about the word my daughter-in-law had used, contribute. I began sorting my room that weekend. Not packing, just sorting. Understanding what was mine and what I would want when I left. The photograph of Raymond went into a bag immediately. My grandmother's quilt. The watercolor. A box of letters from friends stretching back 40 years. People who had known me when I had a name that wasn't just Daniel's mother or Nora and Cooper's grandma or the woman upstairs. I found, in the back of the narrow closet, the leather portfolio I'd carried for 12 years when I worked as a paralegal downtown. I'd stopped working when Raymond got sick. I hadn't thought about that portfolio in years. I took it out and turned it over in my hands. It was good leather, still soft. I set it on the bed with the other things I was keeping. Then I called Marguerite. Marguerite had been my closest friend since we'd worked together in the late 80s. And she had moved 3 years ago into a small building near the river, 4 condominiums converted from an old mill. All owned by women who were, Marguerite Petite. Done being managed. She'd mentioned more than once that the unit next to hers had been vacant for months, waiting for the right person. I called her on a Sunday afternoon and told her I was thinking of making a change. "Finally," she said, "I'll have the manager call you tomorrow." The unit was small, 900 square feet, with exposed brick and tall windows that faced south. There was a narrow kitchen and a bedroom with a clawfoot tub in the bathroom and a little porch that hung over the water. I walked through it with the building manager on a Wednesday morning. She was a compact woman named June, with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the unhurried manner of someone who has stopped trying to rush anything. "Marguerite says you do needlepoint," June said, among other things. I said, "Good light in here," she said. "All day." I signed the lease that afternoon. I didn't tell anyone. Not yet. There was work to do first. Patricia and I met twice more in the following 2 weeks. We finalized the changes to my estate. I signed documents, restructuring my accounts. Updated my beneficiaries, directing a significant portion to a foundation I'd long supported, and a trust for Nora and Cooper that would release to them at 25. Managed by Patricia, rather than their parents, I accepted the developer's offer on the Tennessee land. Subject to closing in 60 days, I signed papers related to my mother's inheritance. By the end of those 2 weeks, the picture of my finances was very different from what anyone in that house would have assumed. Whatever my daughter-in-law had written in pencil next to my account numbers, whatever her calculations about cost and timing and transition, none of it accounted for the version of my life that existed outside the yellow guest room. I found that deeply satisfying. My son's family was going to a wedding in Colorado on a Thursday. They'd be gone through Sunday. My daughter-in-law had made a list of things I should know while they were away, which nights the recycling went out, that Nora's piano teacher might call to reschedule, the code to the back door lock in case I lost my key. She went through the list with me at the kitchen table while my son loaded the car. Her voice patient and careful in the way it always was when she was explaining something she thought I might struggle to retain. I nodded. I thanked her. I offered to water her herbs on the back porch while she was gone. She said that would be lovely. After they left Friday morning, I sat in the kitchen with my coffee for exactly as long as it took me to finish the cup. Then I went upstairs and began. I had been thoughtful about this. I wasn't taking things that weren't mine. And I wasn't leaving a mess. I carried down the bags and boxes I'd packed over the previous week and lined them in the front hallway. Marguerite arrived at 9 with her neighbor's pickup truck and a woman named Diane, who was younger and stronger and didn't ask a single question. Just lifted things and carried them with quiet efficiency. I didn't take much. The photograph of Raymond, the quilt, the watercolor, my clothing, my needlepoint supplies, my books, the leather portfolio, which I had no particular use for but wanted anyway, a small clay pot with a rosemary cutting I'd been rooting on my windowsill for 2 months, waiting until it was ready to be moved. I cleaned the yellow guest room before I left, stripped the bed and left the sheets folded at the foot, wiped down the dresser, straightened the curtains. I wanted to leave it exactly as I'd found it because that was the point. I had been a guest. I had behaved like a guest, and now the guest was going home. I went through the rest of the house once, not looking for things, just looking. The kitchen, where I'd made so many meals. The mudroom where I'd folded so much laundry. The backyard where the hydrangeas I'd planted were doing beautifully. Fat and white. Unbothered by my leaving, I wrote a note on a piece of paper from the legal pad. I've moved into my own home. I wish you well. My attorney, Patricia. We'll be in touch about a few estate matters you should be aware of. Please don't be surprised by what she tells you. I've thought about it carefully, and I'm at peace with it. I'll always love my son and my grandchildren, but I am no longer available to be overlooked. I set the note on the kitchen counter next to the fruit bowl, where it would be impossible to miss. Then I picked up my rosemary cutting and my handbag and walked out through the front door. The morning was warm and bright, the kind of day that feels like a clean page. Marguerite was waiting by the truck with 2 cups of drive-through coffee. She handed me one without saying anything, which is one of the things I have always loved about her. We drove to the mill building by the river, and Diane helped us carry everything upstairs. And by noon, I was sitting on my little porch with the second cup of coffee and the water moving below me and the sun coming through the south-facing windows and landing on the exposed brick in long, golden bass. My phone rang at 7:15 that evening. It was my son. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again at 7:20 and 7:30. At 8. A text came through. Mom, where are you? We just got home. I'm worried. Please call. I sat with my needlepoint, the hummingbird wings, which I'd set aside in the confusion of the past weeks, were still half done. I picked up the pale green thread and kept working. At 8:30, my daughter-in-law called. I let that go to voicemail too. I didn't listen to it until the next morning, when I was calm and fed and had slept in my own bed under Raymond's photograph and my grandmother's quilt, and woken up to the sound of the river. Her voice was clipped, controlled, the way it always was when she was working to contain something larger. Helen, I just need to know you're safe. We found your note. I don't entirely understand what's happened. Please call Daniel. He's very upset. I made my coffee. I sat at my kitchen table, which was smaller than the one in my son's house, but fit exactly right in the space, which was more than I could say for the last 2.5 years of my life. Then I called my son. Mom. His voice broke slightly on that one syllable. Whatever I'd expected, I hadn't expected that. I'm fine. I said. I'm safe. I'm in a new home. I should have told you directly. And I'm sorry I didn't. That wasn't fair to you. I don't understand what happened. What? Why didn't you just talk to me? I thought about how to answer that. I thought about the folder in the desk drawer, the penciled notes about my accounts, the highlighted line about what triggers the transition. I thought about 2.5 years of nodding and making myself useful and quiet and small. I said, that we both knew something needed to change. I just decided to be the one to change it. He was quiet for a moment. Patricia called me this morning. I know. She said there were changes to your estate. To the trust. Yes. Mom. I need to understand. You will. I said. She'll walk you through everything. It's all accounted for. Your children will be well cared for. I just made different choices than you might have expected. I paused. I had more options than you may have realized. There was a long silence on his end. I thought I could hear him breathing. I love you, he said, finally. It came out unguarded. The way things come out when the performance falls away. I love you too, I said. That's not the part that changed. Nora called me on a Tuesday. She was 16 and owned a second-hand phone she'd bought with babysitting money and kept the number private from her parents, which I pretended not to know. She said she'd gotten my new number from Marguerite, who she'd texted without telling anyone. I just wanted to know if you were okay. She said, Dad is really sad. I know. I said, I'm okay. Are you okay? Kind of. She said, It's weird without you. I keep expecting to hear you upstairs. I held the phone and looked out at the river. You can come here. I said, Anytime you want. You and Cooper both. Really, really. But only if you want to. Not because anyone told you to. I want to, she said. Quickly. Before I could finish the sentence. Can I come this weekend? Come Saturday. I said, I'll make the lemon bars you like. She came Saturday. And Cooper came with her. And we spent the morning making lemon bars and sitting on the porch watching the herons fish in the shallows below. Cooper, who was 13 and had recently decided he was too old for most things, leaned on the railing and asked questions about Raymond's fishing boat, which surprised me. I told him about the summer Raymond taught me to read a river how to watch the surface, how to know where the current changed. He listened with the particular quality of attention that young people have when they don't realize they're paying it. We ate lunch with Marguerite, who made her famous pimento cheese, and asked Cooper entirely too many questions about his interests with great enthusiasm, which he secretly enjoyed. Before they left, Nora hugged me at the door, not quickly, not briefly. "I'm glad you're happy," she said into my shoulder. "I am," I said, and it was true in a way it hadn't been in a long time. The week settled into a rhythm I'd forgotten was possible. I woke early, made coffee, sat with the south light and my needlepoint, or my journal, or simply my own quiet thoughts. The building had 4 tenants, and we'd fallen into a loose companionship shared dinners on Fridays. A borrowing arrangement that had produced over the past months the smooth exchange of library books, a folding table, 3 bags of garden soil, and a casserole dish I kept returning and Marguerite kept sending back. No one measured what anyone contributed. No one kept a tally. I joined a watercolor class at the community center 2 mornings a week. My instructor was a deliberate woman named Frances, who had the patience of someone who genuinely believed that improvement was always possible and never in a hurry. My first finished piece was a heron, loose and imperfect, standing in pale blue water. Frances hung it on the wall with the others and said, "The posture is perfect. You got the stillness exactly right." I called Patricia every other week. The developer's timeline moved forward steadily. The Tennessee land would close in 6 weeks. And after that, the sum that would transfer to me was, by any measure, significant. I did not share this information with my son. I would not share it. What I chose to do with my own life, my own money, my own resources was not a matter that required his review or his permission. And I had come to understand, in these quiet weeks by the river, that I had spent too long forgetting that. My daughter-in-law called once. I waited 3 days before calling back. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed to know what I wanted to say. She was calm, which I respected. She apologized. Briefly, and without excessive qualification, I mishandled things. "I'm sorry for how it affected you. I thought things were working fine and I wasn't paying enough attention to whether they actually were." I listened to all of it. When she finished, I said, "Thank you for saying that. I accept it. Daniel misses you." She said, "I know. He can call me any time. He knows that." There was a pause. "Are you happy there?" "Yes," I said, and I meant it without any edge, without wanting her to feel the weight of it. I simply meant it. I've been in the mill building for 4 months now. The rosemary cutting has filled out into a proper little bush on the kitchen windowsill. I finished the hummingbird on the needlepoint both wings now. The long beak. The jewel-bright throat. Marguerite said it was the best thing I'd made in years. And I think she was right. My son comes for dinner on the 2nd Sunday of each month. He brings Cooper, who has started asking to borrow Raymond's old fishing books, which I give him gladly. My daughter-in-law has come twice. We are careful with each other. But carefully is a way of trying. And I give it credit. The lemon bars are always there when anyone visits. I make them because I want to. Not because a schedule requires it. Not because it makes me useful. I make them because I like the smell of lemon zest in the morning. And I like to see people eat something warm and good. And because making food for the people I love is its own quiet pleasure when it comes from a full hand instead of an empty one. Last week, I sat on my porch in the early evening and watched a great blue heron land on the far bank. Slow and deliberate. Like it knew exactly where it was going and had decided there was no need to rush. It stood very still in the amber water and looked at something I couldn't see from where I was. After a while, it lifted, wide and unhurried, and was gone. I picked up my needlepoint. I thought about Patricia, and the papers I'd signed, and the Tennessee land that was no longer land but freedom. Solid and certain in an account in my name alone. I thought about Nora's voice on the phone saying, "I'm glad you're happy," as if it were the simplest, most obvious thing in the world. I thought about Raymond, who used to say that the bravest thing a person could do was stop pretending a situation was fine when they knew it wasn't. Even when changing it was hard. Even when no one gave you credit for the courage it took. I had not made a dramatic exit. I had made no speeches. I had not confronted anyone in a kitchen or said the things I'd thought about saying in the dark hours of too many sleepless nights in the yellow guest room. I had just decided, quietly and completely, that I was worth more than the role I'd been handed. And then I'd built a life that proved it. The heron was gone. The river was still. The south light came through my windows, the way Marguerite had promised it would. All day long. As if it had been waiting for someone to sit in it, and finally not be in a hurry to leave.